Chapter 1. The bell above the bookstore door gave a pathetic jingle as Sophia Monroe pushed it open. Another thrilling Friday night, she muttered to no one in particular. The warm scent of old paper wrapped around her like a worn blanket. The bookstore, Hollow Reeds, was quiet, too quiet, really. Sophia flicked on the lights, the faint hum filling the emptiness. She glanced around the small shop, half expecting something exciting to happen. Maybe a rogue book would fall dramatically from the shelf, or a mysterious stranger would show up looking for some ancient cursed novel. Nothing. With a sigh, she made her way behind the counter, tossing her bag under the register and tying her hair into a loose bun. It was her usual late shift, just her, the books, and the occasional browser who never bought anything. "Exciting life you've built for yourself, Soph," she muttered, flipping open the battered copy of Pride and Prejudice that permanently lived on the counter. She never made it past chapter 10. The doorbell jingled again. Sophia looked up, startled, but it was just Lena. "God, you scared me," Sophia said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Why do you always sneak in like that?" Lena grinned, leaning dramatically on the counter. "Because your face when I do is pure gold. And seriously, you need to get out of here. It's a Friday night." Sophia raised a brow. "You say that like there's anywhere to go in Black Hollow." Lena twirled a lock of her dark curls and smirked. "Fine. Stay here forever with Mr. Darcy. Just don't expect him to keep you warm at night." Sophia rolled her eyes, but smiled. "Don't shame me for living vicariously through fictional men. Besides, you know how my last attempt at dating went." Lena made a sympathetic noise. "Oh, right. Mister, I only drink kombucha and write poems about leaves." "Don't forget the ukulele," Sophia added, snorting. "You attract the weirdest guys. I think they just sense the chaos in me." Lena laughed, but straightened, eyeing Sophia seriously. "In all honesty, Soph, you should come out with me tomorrow. There's a thing at the Den. Maybe meet someone who isn't haunted by craft beer." "The Den? Isn't that the weird bar on the edge of the woods?" "Yes," Lena replied slowly. "But it's not that weird. The drinks are cheap and the crowd is interesting." "Pass," Sophia said, shaking her head. "You're impossible. And proud." Lena leaned closer, lowering her voice dramatically. "You know, you could be murdered one of these nights walking home alone through the woods." Sophia snorted. "I'm more likely to trip over a tree root and die from embarrassment." Lena sighed and gave up, turning toward the door. "Fine. Stay boring. But text me when you get home, okay?" "I always do." The door jingled again as Lena disappeared into the night, leaving Sophia alone with the steady hum of the lights. By the time she closed up the shop, the town had long since settled into its usual nighttime silence. Black Hollow's streets were deserted, and the glow from the street lamps cast long shadows across the cobblestones. Sophia pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and started down the narrow path leading toward the forest. It was the fastest route home, though Lena's words about being murdered in the woods echoed faintly in her mind. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "It's just trees and squirrels." Still, her steps quickened. The woods stretched out like a dark sea, the path barely visible beneath the faint moonlight. Sophia focused on the crunch of leaves underfoot, but after a few moments, she slowed. Something felt off. She glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Paranoia. I've got to stop watching horror movies. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, and Sophia swore she heard something. Footsteps. "Hello?" she called, immediately regretting it. "Great. Just announce yourself to the serial killer." Silence. She shook her head and kept walking, but the feeling lingered. A chill ran down her spine, and then she heard it. Low and guttural, a growl. Sophia froze. It's just an animal, probably a dog from one of the nearby farms. But even as she tried to rationalize it, her feet took 2 cautious steps backward. Another growl, closer this time. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and she broke into a sprint, practically flying down the path. The street lights never looked so inviting. By the time she stumbled onto her porch, she was gasping for air. Sophia glanced back toward the woods. Nothing moved. She laughed shakily, pressing her hand to her chest. I need to get out more. From the darkness, just beyond the trees, silver eyes blinked once, and then vanished. Chapter 2. The air felt different the next morning. Crisp, but heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Sophia sipped her coffee, staring out her kitchen window. Her small apartment overlooked the edge of the forest, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. The view was beautiful during the day, but at night, not so much. She tapped her fingers against the ceramic mug, the events of the previous evening replaying in her head. That growl. She hadn't imagined it. Had she? It was probably a dog, she muttered, as if saying it aloud made it true. Or a very disgruntled raccoon. Her phone buzzed. Lena, did you get eaten by forest monsters last night, or am I just being ignored? Still alive, mildly traumatized, but breathing. Lena, you need to stop tempting fate. Sophia, I literally walk home. That's not tempting fate, it's commuting. Lena, First it's a walk. Next thing you know, you're a missing person poster. Sophia, I'll keep that in mind. Maybe invest in some pepper spray. Lena, or a boyfriend. Sophia, dogs are easier. Lena, girl, even a dog would run from you at this point. Sophia snorted into her coffee and set the phone down. Lena wasn't entirely wrong. Pushing the thought aside, Sophia grabbed her jacket and stepped outside. The bookstore didn't open until noon, but she liked the quiet of the early morning. Besides, fresh air never hurt anyone. The path she took cut through the forest, a shortcut that trimmed 10 minutes off her usual walk to town. The leaves crunched under her boots as she moved, sunlight filtering through the branches overhead. But as she rounded a bend, she stopped cold. The bark on one of the trees was shredded, jagged claw marks slashing through the trunk. The cuts were deep, too deep for any normal animal. What the? Sophia stepped closer, brushing her fingers over the grooves. They were fresh. A bear, maybe. But Black Hollow hadn't had a bear sighting in years. She glanced around, suddenly aware of how quiet the woods had become. Not even the usual chirping of birds broke the silence. Nope, not creepy at all, she muttered, quickening her pace. The town came into view a few minutes later, the familiar sight of hollow reeds calming her nerves. By the time she pushed open the bookstore door, she'd almost convinced herself she was overreacting. Almost. By lunchtime, Sophia was behind the counter, stacking new arrivals and half listening to the podcast playing from her phone. The monotony of shelving books was usually comforting, but her mind wandered. Claw marks, growls. She shook her head. I've been watching too many thrillers, she told the nearest shelf of romance novels. The bell over the door jingled, and Sophia glanced up to greet the customer, only to find the doorway empty. Frowning, she stepped around the counter and peered outside. Nothing but the wind rustling the leaves. Her gaze drifted toward the edge of the woods across the street, and then she saw it. A large, dark shape stood at the tree line. A wolf. Its fur was nearly black, thick and glossy under the sun, but it was the eyes that froze her. Silver, sharp, watching. Sophia blinked. The wolf was gone. Her heart hammered in her chest. I did not just see that. For the next 5 minutes, she stared at the spot where the wolf had been, half expecting it to reappear. Nothing. "You're losing it," she whispered to herself as she stepped back inside. But even as she returned to shelving books, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. Later that evening, Sophia locked up the bookstore and started the walk home. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. She took the same path as always, but her steps felt heavier. Each crack of a branch or rustle of leaves had her glancing over her shoulder. "There's nothing out here," she reminded herself. Yet, the moment she reached the spot where she'd seen the claw marks, she slowed. Sophia glanced at the tree. The scratches were still there, deep and undeniable. A breeze swept through the trees, carrying a faint sound. Soft, like footsteps. Her head whipped around. No one. And yet, the weight of eyes lingered, just beyond the tree line. By the time she reached her apartment, her nerves were shot. She double-checked the locks, drawing the curtains even though she rarely did. Just as she sat on the couch, the feeling returned. Stronger this time. Sophia stood and moved to the window, peeking through the curtain. The street was empty. "Get it together," she whispered, forcing herself to step away. From the shadows across the street, Lucian watched her window, his silver eyes catching the faintest sliver of moonlight. He shouldn't be here, he knew that, but knowing didn't stop him from staying. Chapter 3. I'm telling you, it was huge. Like, dog of your nightmares huge. Lena arched a brow over her coffee cup. "And you're sure it wasn't just a large, misunderstood golden retriever?" Sophia shot her a flat look, dragging her spoon through the remnants of her half-melted latte. They sat in their usual corner at Crescent Cafe, tucked into the back like they were plotting some elaborate scheme. "I know what I saw, Lena. Golden retrievers don't look at you like they're deciding which part of you to eat first." Lena snorted. "Okay, fair. But you have to admit, mysterious, oversized forest wolf sounds like something out of one of those shifter romance books you pretend not to read." Sophia groaned and buried her face in her hands. "You're impossible. And you're paranoid. It's cute, honestly." Sophia peeked through her fingers. "I hate you." Lena grinned and took a long sip from her cup. "Hate me all you want, but if you start sprouting fur and howling at the moon, I told you so." "I'm not going to." Sophia cut herself off, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Not that it mattered. Black Hollow wasn't exactly bustling at 10 in the morning. It wasn't that weird. "You ran home like your ass was on fire." "Because something growled at me." Lena leaned forward, clearly enjoying herself far too much. And it wasn't just any growl. Oh no, it was... She dropped her voice dramatically. The growl of a hot, brooding shifter alpha. Sophia threw a crumpled napkin at her. By the time Sophia made it to Hollow Reeds for her shift, the conversation still lingered in her head. Lena wasn't wrong. There was something unsettling about how fixated she'd been on the wolf's silver eyes. But surely that was just her mind playing tricks. It had to be. Sophia flipped the sign to open and settled in behind the counter, pulling out the new shipment of books. The familiarity of sorting titles into neat stacks helped ground her, at least for a little while. By mid-afternoon, the uneasy sensation returned, that prickling at the back of her neck, like someone was watching. She scanned the bookstore. Empty, aside from Mrs. Calloway browsing the mystery section for the 100th time. Sophia shook it off and returned to unpacking. Then the bell above the door jingled. A tall man lingered just beyond the threshold, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Sophia stilled. His black hair fell in tousled waves over his forehead, and the leather jacket he wore fit too well, like it had been made just for him. He looked like the kind of guy who belonged on the back of a motorcycle, not in a quiet little bookshop. "Hi," she managed, straightening. "Let me know if you need anything." The man didn't step further inside. He just watched her. A strange sort of warmth spread over Sophia's skin, but not the pleasant kind, more like standing too close to a flame, unsure if it would burn. "Are you looking for something in particular?" she asked, trying again. Still nothing. Sophia shifted her weight. "Okay, I'll just be over here." Before she could blink, the man turned and disappeared out the door, the bell jingling in his wake. Sophia's heart thudded uncomfortably. She stepped around the counter, peering out the window. He was already gone. That night, the air outside Sophia's apartment felt heavier than usual. She double-checked the locks, again, and pulled the curtains shut. It was probably nothing. Probably. Yet, as she curled up on the couch, she couldn't ignore the faint tug in her gut, like the forest itself was keeping watch. And somewhere, just beyond the tree line, Lucian stood in silence. The faint rustle of footsteps broke through the quiet, and his silver eyes narrowed. Another wolf emerged from the shadows, lingering too close to the edge of Sophia's building. Lucian's voice was low, edged with warning. "She's off limits." The rogue wolf's eyes flickered amber, but it didn't challenge him. It slunk back into the forest, disappearing beneath the cover of the trees. Lucian stayed a little longer, his gaze fixed on the light in Sophia's window. He should leave, but he didn't. Chapter 4. The forest path felt narrower tonight. Sophia tugged her jacket closer as the wind snuck beneath the collar, biting against her skin. Black Hollow was as quiet as always. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made the shadows seem darker than usual. She told herself she wasn't nervous. "Totally fine," she muttered, stepping over a root she'd tripped on more times than she cared to admit. "Just me and the trees. And maybe a psychotic owl somewhere." Her laugh barely made it past her lips. The rustling came next. It wasn't the casual flutter of a bird or the scamper of some small animal. This was heavier, deliberate. She stopped walking. "Hello?" Her voice wobbled, which annoyed her more than the fact that she was talking to the woods. Nothing. Sophia's hand drifted toward her phone, just in case. The growl followed, low, close, too close. Her stomach tightened. She scanned the trees, but the shadows seemed endless. "Okay," she whispered, taking a cautious step backward. Definitely not an owl. The underbrush snapped. Sophia's breath hitched as a figure emerged from the trees. But this wasn't a normal wolf. It was larger than any wolf had a right to be. Its fur was matted and dark, and its eyes, yellow, sharp, unlocked onto her. She turned to run. The wolf lunged. Sophia stumbled, barely dodging as it skidded across the path, claws scraping against the dirt. Her pulse roared in her ears as she sprinted, but the creature was faster. It crashed into her side. The world spun as she hit the ground hard, gravel biting into her palms. She rolled just in time to see the wolf circling back, teeth bared. Sophia scrambled, searching for something, anything, to defend herself. But the wolf didn't strike. Snarl, deeper and more guttural, echoed from the trees. The rogue's head snapped up, its ears flat against its skull. Another shape burst through the brush, faster, darker. A second wolf, but this one was sleek and controlled, silver eyes locked on the rogue. The black wolf lunged, colliding with the rogue mid-air. Sophia froze, heart hammering as the two creatures tumbled, snarling and biting. It wasn't a fight. It was a storm. The rogue snapped at the black wolf's throat, but the latter twisted, sinking its teeth into the rogue's shoulder with terrifying precision. Sophia couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The rogue yelped as the black wolf threw it to the ground, pinning it effortlessly. For a long moment, neither wolf moved. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the rogue twisted free and disappeared into the trees, vanishing into the night. Sophia pressed her palm against the cold dirt, her entire body trembling. The black wolf stepped forward. It was larger up close, shoulders broad, fur like obsidian silk. But the eyes, they were the same silver she'd seen from the bookstore. "Hey," she whispered, even though she had no idea why she was talking to it. "You saved me?" The wolf's gaze lingered, something almost human flickering behind those eyes. Before she could think of what to say next, the wolf shuddered and shifted. Sophia's breath caught as the black fur melted away, twisting and contorting until a man knelt before her. Lucian. He rose slowly, his breathing even as if he hadn't just wrestled a mutant forest monster. His bare chest caught the moonlight, the faintest trace of claw marks fading along his ribs. For a second, Sophia forgot how to speak. Lucian's eyes narrowed as he stepped toward her, offering his hand. "You're hurt." Sophia blinked. What?" The words weren't coming. Lucian didn't press. His gaze softened, and without another word, he scooped her into his arms, effortlessly. "Hey!" she yelped, wriggling. I can walk." "You're bleeding," Lucian said calmly, though there was an edge to his voice. "I'm fine." "You're not." Sophia opened her mouth to argue, but clamped it shut when she felt something warm trailing down her arm. "Oh, that's happening." Lucian carried her like she weighed nothing, his strides long and deliberate as he stepped back onto the path. "I'm serious, though," she mumbled against his shoulder. "I'm totally capable of walking." "Probably. I'll put you down when I think you won't fall over." Sophia huffed but gave up, her cheek resting against him, half from exhaustion, half from the strange, lingering comfort in his presence. They didn't speak again until the lights of her apartment flickered through the trees. Lucian stopped at the porch, lowering her gently onto her feet. Sophia wobbled, but stayed upright, gripping the railing for support. "So," she started, glancing at him, "was that some kind of exceptionally weird bear, or are we just not going to talk about the whole werewolf thing?" Lucian's lips twitched into something resembling a smirk. "You should get some rest." Not an answer. "I know." Sophia squinted at him. "I'm not hallucinating, am I?" "No." Sophia squinted at him. "I'm not hallucinating, am I?" "No." "Right. Cool. Love that for me." Lucian's gaze softened just slightly, but he didn't linger. With a nod, he disappeared into the woods without another word. Sophia watched the spot where he vanished, long after he was gone. "Yep," she muttered, finally stepping inside. "Totally fine." But as she closed the door, she glanced toward the window, half expecting to see silver eyes staring back.
Chapter 5. Sophia woke to the smell of burnt toast. Her eyes cracked open just enough to register the faint smoke curling toward the ceiling. A groggy groan escaped her lips as she kicked the blanket off and padded to the kitchen. "Lena, what are you—" Lena stood at the stove, squinting at the toaster like it personally offended her. I swear this thing is possessed. Sophia crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. Or you could stop jamming bread in there like a savage. Lena flipped her hair dramatically over one shoulder. Excuse me, but I came over to make sure you didn't get mauled by forest demons last night. This is the thanks I get? Sophia arched a brow. You broke in. Spare key. Not the same thing. Sophia snorted, grabbing the ruined toast and tossing it in the trash. For the record, I wasn't mauled. But you— Lena set the butter knife down with a suspicious squint. You're limping. Sophia glanced at her leg, wrapped neatly in bandages. It's fine. I tripped. You're the worst liar I've ever met. It's a gift, Sophia muttered, hoping Lena would let it go. No such luck. Lena crossed her arms, tapping her foot against the floor. So, are we just ignoring the fact that you looked like you saw a ghost when I called you last night? Sophia busied herself with pouring coffee. I was tired. Uh-huh. And maybe a little paranoid. Lena's eyes narrowed. About what? Sophia hesitated. Images of silver eyes, dark fur, and the way Lucian had shifted lingered like ghosts behind her eyes. But saying it out loud? Yeah, no. An animal. I thought I saw a big dog. Lena wasn't buying it. You ran for your life from a dog? It was very big. Sophia. I'm fine, Lena. Really. Lena sighed, rubbing her temple. I'm just saying you should report it. What if it wasn't a dog? Maybe it was a coyote or something. I doubt coyotes know how to wrestle like they're auditioning for Wolf Fight Club. Lena's brows shot up. Oh, so now we're acknowledging the part where this sounds like a low-budget horror movie? Sophia winced. Forget I said anything. Lena didn't look convinced, but she dropped it. For now. Fine. But if I see your face on a missing poster, I'm personally haunting you in the afterlife. Sophia smirked. Noted. By the time she arrived at Reed's, Sophia was starting to believe her own excuses. Maybe it was just a big animal, or a strange dream brought on by too much caffeine and not enough sleep, or— Oh. Sophia slammed the thought down before it could fully form. The bookstore was calm, which suited her just fine. Normal. Predictable. No large wolves lurking behind bookshelves. Halfway through restocking the shelves, the bell above the door jingled. Sophia glanced up, heart immediately dropping. Lucian. He hovered at the threshold, like he wasn't sure if he belonged inside. Oh, come on, Sophia forced a polite smile. Looking for something? Lucian's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and unreadable, just like the night before. For a second, he said nothing. Then, finally, he stepped inside. I thought I'd check on you. His voice was low, like he wasn't used to casual conversation. Sophia frowned, setting a book down with a little too much force. I told you, I'm fine. Lucian's gaze lingered on her bandaged leg. You're not fine. You were attacked. She straightened, crossing her arms. Tripped. Lucian arched a brow, clearly unimpressed by her deflection. Right. And I suppose that thing you tripped over had claws? Sophia's cheeks burned. Look, whatever happened, I can handle it. I don't need some random stranger, Lucian finished, smirking slightly. Exactly. Lucian stepped closer, and Sophia's pulse betrayed her, hammering just a little harder than she wanted it to. I was just passing through, he said, eyes glinting. I'm not planning on hovering over you if that's what you're worried about. Good, because I've got enough going on without mysterious woodsy guys following me around. Lucian's gaze flickered with something unreadable. I'll keep my distance. With that, he turned and left the shop, disappearing down the street like he'd never been there. Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The evening settled over Black Hollow quietly, but Sophia couldn't shake the weight pressing down on her. She curled up on her couch with a blanket, flicking through channels mindlessly. anything to distract herself. But the sensation of eyes, silver eyes, still tugged at her. She hadn't even realized she'd dozed off until a soft noise woke her. The apartment was still, but something outside the window caught her eye. Faint scratches marked the wooden frame of her porch, 3 deep grooves carved into the surface. Sophia's stomach flipped. No. But even as she stared at the marks, she felt an odd sense of protection, like whoever made them wasn't trying to scare her. She glanced toward the woods, where shadows stretched long beneath the trees. Lucian was out there. Somewhere. Watching. For the first time, she wasn't sure if that should comfort or terrify her.
Chapter 6. Sophia hadn't planned to take the long way home, but when the afternoon air was crisp and the bookstore felt stifling, she thought the forest path might help clear her head. Sunlight trickled through the canopy, dappling the trail ahead. Nothing scary about it in daylight. She repeated that thought like a mantra, gripping the strap of her satchel a little tighter. It's just trees, it's squirrels, maybe a mildly aggressive deer. But the claw marks she'd found on her porch the night before lingered in her mind. She'd convinced herself they were oddly protective, like a warning, but not against her. Sophia huffed. God, I'm spiraling. A branch snapped in the distance. Her steps slowed. Don't stop. Don't stop. Another snap. Closer this time. Sophia swallowed hard and kept walking, forcing her eyes ahead. The small town was only 10 minutes away, but every instinct screamed at her to run. A low growl curled through the trees. She froze. Okay, definitely not a deer. Heart hammering, Sophia turned her head slowly. A dark shape slipped between the trees just off the trail. The same yellow eyes she'd seen that night glowed from the shadows, the rogue wolf. It slinked forward, fur bristling, blocking the path behind her. Cool, she muttered. It's happening again. Amazing. She stepped back, her foot crunching against dead leaves. The wolf's ears twitched, but it didn't lunge. Yet. Sophia could feel the weight of its stare, like it was waiting. Go away, she whispered, because apparently talking to feral creatures was her new survival tactic. The wolf crouched lower. Her pulse shot through her ears. Then a voice, low, sharp, cut through the silence. That's enough. Sophia spun around. Lucian. He stepped onto the path like he'd always belonged there. Broad shoulders, dark jacket, and that impossible calm that had no business being this attractive. The rogue wolf hesitated. Lucian didn't move closer, but the air around him shifted. Darker, heavier. His silver eyes locked with the wolves, and though Lucian said nothing else, his presence alone seemed to drive the creature back. The rogue growled softly but retreated, melting into the shadows until the forest swallowed it whole. Sophia exhaled hard, leaning on the nearest tree for support. You okay? Lucian's voice was calm, but there was something tight underneath it. Sophia straightened, brushing her hair out of her face with shaky hands. Sure, why not? Lucian's gaze lingered on her, like he wasn't buying it. Thanks for the assist, by the way, she added, offering a weak smile. I probably would have ended up as some kind of rogue wolf smack. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was the faintest flicker of amusement. You shouldn't be out here. Sophia crossed her arms, trying to look less rattled. I walk this trail all the time. Not anymore. Her brows lifted. Oh? And who decided that? Lucian took a slow step toward her. The same person who just saved you. Sophia opened her mouth for a smart retort, but his gaze pinned her in place. Stay away from the woods at night, he said softly, though his tone left no room for argument. Why? Lucian glanced toward the trees, his jaw tightening. Because you're drawing attention. Sophia frowned. From what? Wildlife? Worse. There was something about the way he said it, the weight behind that one word that made her stop pushing. Lucian turned to leave. Wait. Her voice sounded smaller than she liked. Why are you even out here? Lucian paused. He didn't look back when he answered. I was following him. The wolf? Yes. Sophia hesitated, but curiosity burned brighter than fear. Well. Finally, Lucian met her eyes. Because he wasn't supposed to be near you. The implication hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Sophia swallowed. I'm guessing this isn't some territorial wildlife thing. Lucian's lips curved. Barely. But there was no humor in it. No. Sophia took a step forward, dropping her voice. Is this the part where you tell me you moonlight as a supernatural bodyguard? Lucian exhaled through his nose. I didn't realize you were the type to joke when you're scared. I didn't realize you were the type to show up out of nowhere when things get weird, she shot back. Lucian tilted his head, considering her. Maybe I am. Sophia crossed her arms tighter, unsure if she was supposed to feel comforted or concerned. Look, I appreciate the rescue, but I'm fine, she said, though her pulse told a different story. You're not. Lucian's gaze darkened slightly, but it wasn't anger, more like frustration. You're not safe, Sophia, he said, and for the first time hearing him say her name made her stomach flip. You're caught up in something you don't understand. Sophia wanted to argue, but the words died on her tongue. Lucian took a step back, his eyes still locked on hers. Go home, and lock the door. With that, he disappeared down the path, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the forest. Sophia exhaled shakily. Not ominous at all, she whispered, hugging herself against the breeze. But even as she made her way home, she knew, whatever this was, it wasn't over. Chapter 7. The bell above hollow wreaths chimed softly as Sophia propped the door open. Late afternoon sunlight spilled across the floorboards, but even the warmth of the bookstore didn't shake the weight pressing on her chest. Lucian hadn't said much since the forest incident. He'd warned her, then disappeared. Again, classic, mysterious hot guy move. But it didn't explain the way her skin prickled every time she stepped outside, or how she caught glimpses of shadows that seemed to move just a little too quickly. She wasn't paranoid, at least she hoped she wasn't. Sophia slid behind the counter, flipping through the store's inventory sheets, more to distract herself than anything else. Then the door opened. Lucian stepped inside. As usual, his presence felt like it occupied far more space than it physically should. Dark jacket, calm expression, and those silver eyes that somehow seemed to see right through her. Behind him, another man followed, broader, rougher around the edges, and wearing the kind of smirk that made Sophia immediately suspicious. Is this her? The man asked, folding his arms as he leaned lazily against the doorway. His voice held the same gravelly edge as Lucian's, but carried a teasing lilt beneath it. Lucian shot him a look. Darius. Darius's smirk widened. What? You said you were babysitting a human. Just wanted to see for myself. Sophia arched a brow. I'm standing right here. Darius grinned, offering his hand. Darius Blackwood, Lucian's long-suffering brother. You must be Sophia. Sophia hesitated for half a second before shaking his hand. His grip was warm, firm, like Lucian's, but less intense. "Nice to meet you," she said, though her eyes narrowed slightly. "And I wasn't aware I needed babysitting." Lucian exhaled quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't." Darius didn't let up. "Don't take it personally. Lucian's been pacing like a caged wolf since he decided to protect you." Sophia blinked. "I'm sorry." "Decided to protect me?" Lucian's gaze cut to Darius in warning. "You know what?" Darius pushed off the doorframe, raising his hands. "I'll let him explain. I just wanted to check in. Make sure the mysterious human isn't secretly a siren or something." Sophia crossed her arms. "Well, I'm flattered you think I'd have that kind of supernatural allure." Darius grinned. "You're welcome." With that, he gave Lucian a brief nod and ducked out the door, leaving the two of them alone. Sophia shifted, crossing her arms tighter. "Your brother seems fun." "He's nosy," Lucian replied simply. "So you decided to protect me?" Lucian met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I didn't have much of a choice." Sophia's brow furrowed. "You keep saying things like that, like I've somehow triggered this entire supernatural crisis." Lucian hesitated. "It's not a crisis. Not yet." "That's not exactly comforting." Lucian stepped closer, resting his hands on the counter between them. His tone softened, but there was a weight behind his words. "There are things about this town you don't know, Sophia. Things I didn't want to involve you in." "Well, too late," she shot back. His lips twitched, almost a smirk, but not quite. "Marcus Fail." Lucian's voice dipped lower, and the temperature of the room seemed to shift. "He's the one responsible for the rogue wolf that attacked you. He's gathering followers, shifters who don't follow the pack's rules." Sophia's stomach tightened. "Okay, but why does that have anything to do with me?" Lucian's gaze held hers, unwavering. "I don't know. Yet." She swallowed. "Right. Cool. Love being an unsolved mystery?" Lucian straightened. "Until I figure it out, you need to stay close to me, or at least stay out of the woods." Sophia arched her brow. "Are you suggesting I stay on a leash?" Lucian's mouth twitched again, this time just barely hiding the smirk. "I don't think that'd go over well." "Not even remotely." Their eyes met, and for a brief second the tension lightened, but the weight in Lucian's expression lingered. "I'm serious," he said after a moment. "You're not safe. Not here, not alone. Marcus knows who you are now. That makes you a target." Sophia's pulse quickened. "Okay, well, that's not terrifying at all." Lucian didn't move, but his gaze softened slightly. "I won't let anything happen to you." Sophia hated how much she believed him. Later that evening, Sophia sat across from Lena at Crescent Cafe, stirring her drink with a little more force than necessary. Lena watched her carefully. "Okay, spill it. You've been weird all day." Sophia hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "It's nothing." "Liar." Sophia sighed. "Fine. It's Lucian." Lena perked up immediately. "Oh, the hot, broody one? I knew he was trouble." "It's not like that," Sophia said, though the heat in her face betrayed her. I don't know, things feel weird, like weird. Lena leaned forward. "Define weird." Sophia chewed the inside of her cheek. "I keep running into him. He's acting like I need protection or something." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Protection from what?" Sophia hesitated. She left out the rogue wolves, shifting, and Marcus. "Just some bad people, I think." Lena watched her carefully but didn't press. "Well, if things get sketchy, you call me." Got it? Sophia smiled faintly. Got it. Got it. By the time Lucian escorted Sophia home, the streets were dark, but as they reached her front steps, a figure lingered in the distance. Marcus. His amber eyes gleamed in the shadows. Lucian tensed beside her. Go inside, he murmured, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sophia didn't hesitate, but as she closed the door, she glanced out the window, catching the faint flicker of Marcus's gaze, fixed right on her. Chapter 8. Sophia's boots crunched against the forest floor as she followed Lucian deeper into the woods, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The path was narrow, winding between towering pines that swallowed the light whole. How much further? She asked, trying to keep her voice light, but the unease was hard to hide. Nervous? No, she lied. It's just... I didn't exactly picture secret forest meetings as part of my week. Lucian's lips twitched. You'll get used to it. That's not the reassurance you think it is. He didn't respond, but something about the way his shoulders relaxed told her he wasn't as cold as he let on. A minute later, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing. Hidden within the shadows was a series of low, rustic buildings, partially hidden by vines and the dense underbrush. Sophia slowed. Is this where you all hang out and compare wolf sizes? Lucian stopped beside her, arms crossed. Something like that. The sarcasm earned her a sideways glance, but there was something else, an edge of protectiveness. This is the Pack's territory. No one outside of us knows about it, Lucian said. His voice was calm, but there was weight behind the words. Sophia stepped forward, letting her gaze drift over the compound. A few figures moved in the distance, watching, waiting. Their eyes flickered in the low light, glowing faintly. She swallowed hard. Definitely not Kansas anymore. Darius appeared from the far side of the clearing, leaning lazily against one of the buildings. His grin spread wide as he spotted them. Well, look who survived the trip. I half expected her to turn back. Sophia raised an eyebrow. I didn't realize I had the option. Lucian shot Darius a look, but the younger Blackwood didn't flinch. Relax, Darius said, waving a hand. I'm just making sure she knows the risks. Sophia narrowed her eyes. Risks like... Oh, you know. Darius's eyes gleamed with amusement. The occasional rogue prowling near your place. Nothing too concerning. Sophia froze. Excuse me? Darius shrugged. It's not like you didn't already know something was out there. Lucian's jaw tightened. Darius. What? She's bound to figure it out eventually. I'm standing right here, Sophia snapped, glaring at both of them. Darius only smirked. Lucian stepped forward, the tension between them palpable. She doesn't need to be scared more than she already is, Lucian said quietly, but there was an unmistakable warning in his tone. Darius held Lucian's gaze for a long moment before letting out a sigh. Fine, I'll keep my mouth shut. Sophia shifted awkwardly. Well, this has been super fun and not terrifying at all, but I think I'll head back now. She turned, ready to leave, but a figure stepped into her path. A woman, sharp-eyed and with long dark hair tied back, blocked the exit. Her gaze flicked over Sophia with thinly veiled disdain. You're the human Lucian's been dragging around. Sophia lifted her chin. I prefer Sophia. The woman's eyes narrowed. What exactly makes you so special? Sophia blinked. Nothing? Exactly, the woman muttered, brushing past her as if she wasn't worth the time. Sophia's stomach twisted. Clearly making friends wasn't on today's agenda. Lucian stepped forward. his gaze locking with the woman's. "She's not your concern, Asha." Asha huffed, brushing him off. "You're right, but she's yours. That makes her all of ours." Without another word, Asha disappeared into one of the buildings, leaving Sophia standing awkwardly in the clearing. "Wow," Sophia muttered. "Friendly crowd." Lucian exhaled through his nose, glancing at her. "They'll get used to you." Sophia crossed her arms. "I'm not sure I'll get used to them." Darius chuckled from the sideline. "She's not wrong. You did kind of throw her to the wolves, literally." Lucian ignored him. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very aware of how out of place she was. "Look," she said. "I appreciate you guys playing supernatural bodyguard, but I'm not helpless. I can take care of myself." Lucian's gaze softened slightly, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "Can you fight?" Sophia hesitated. "I mean, I've done kickboxing. Once." Darius laughed outright, and Lucian pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'll take that as a no," Lucian said. Sophia crossed her arms tighter. "I was more into book clubs than street fights, sorry." Lucian's expression shifted. "Come with me." Before she could argue, he led her to the far side of the clearing, where a wide open patch of grass stretched beneath the trees. "We'll start with the basics," Lucian said, rolling his shoulders. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Wait, you're serious? You want to survive, don't you?" "Well, yeah, but..." Lucian didn't give her a chance to finish. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Trust me," he said softly. Her breath caught. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine, but not in fear. "Fine," she whispered, stepping back and attempting to look more confident than she felt. "But if you throw me, I swear I'm biting you." Lucian smirked. "I'll take my chances." Later, as they trained beneath the canopy, Sophia caught a glimpse of scars tracing along Lucian's back when his jacket slipped. Silver scars, jagged, old. And for the first time, she wondered just how much Lucian Blackwood had been through to stand between her and whatever dangers lurked in the dark. Chapter 9. Sophia could feel the stares. The pack had gathered in the clearing, some stretching lazily while others were already sparring in pairs. Every so often a pair of eyes flicked her way, more curious than welcoming. Lucian stood beside her, arms crossed, his usual unreadable expression fixed firmly in place. "This feels like high school gym class," Sophia muttered, shifting under the weight of their attention. "Except everyone here could probably bite my head off." Lucian's lips twitched. "They're just curious. They look more like they're deciding if I'd be better roasted or grilled." "You'll be fine," Lucian said, though his tone wasn't entirely convincing. Darius sauntered over, wiping his hands on a towel slung around his neck. His grin practically shone. "So the human's joining us for training. What, are we teaching her how to throw a punch without breaking a nail?" Sophia shot him a look. "I'll have you know I can throw a punch just fine." Darius arched a brow. "Oh? Guess we'll see." Lucian stepped in. "She's here to learn, not get thrown around. No promises," Darius said with a wink. Sophia rolled her eyes. "I'm getting the feeling he enjoys this a little too much," Lucian smirked. "He does." Darius tossed his towel aside and cracked his knuckles. "All right, human, you're up." Sophia blinked. "Wait, now? You wanted to train, didn't you?" She hesitated, glancing at Lucian. "You can sit out," Lucian said quietly, but Sophia caught the faintest flicker in his eyes, like he almost wanted her to back down. "No," she said firmly, stepping forward. "I've got this." Lucian watched her carefully but nodded. The pack circled loosely around the sparring area, murmurs passing between them as Sophia squared up against Darius. "No pressure," Darius said with a grin, hands raised in a casual fighting stance. "I'll go easy." "Don't." A ripple of interest passed through the watching wolves. Darius arched a brow. "You sure about that?" "You sure about that?" "Positive." Darius chuckled. "All right then, try not to cry." Sophia lunged. She wasn't graceful, far from it, but she had speed, and when Darius sidestepped to grab her arm, she ducked under it, twisting awkwardly but managing to stay upright. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Darius blinked, clearly not expecting her to dodge. "Lucky shot." Sophia grinned. "Sure." They circled again. Darius struck faster this time, sweeping low to catch her legs, but Sophia jumped back just in time, her heart hammered. The pack's murmurs grew louder. "Not bad," Darius admitted, eyes narrowing slightly in concentration. Sophia tried not to let the shock hit her face. "I'm actually doing this." Darius moved to grapple, but as his arm hooked around her, she twisted sharply, elbowing him, probably harder than necessary, in the ribs. A sharp oof escaped him as he stumbled back. The pack burst into laughter. Sophia stepped back, panting, but a grin tugged at her lips. Lucian, standing at the edge of the circle, watched with quiet amusement. Darius rubbed his ribs, eyes narrowing but not unkindly. "All right, human. Maybe you can throw a punch." Applause echoed from the pack, some wolves nodding with newfound respect. For the first time, Sophia felt like she wasn't entirely out of place. Later, as the pack dispersed for the day, Sophia leaned against a nearby tree, wiping sweat from her brow. "That wasn't awful," she admitted aloud. Lucian appeared at her side, arms still crossed. "You did better than I expected." "Wow, such high praise," she teased. Lucian's lips twitched. "Don't let it go to your head." Before she could fire back, a familiar voice called out from the tree line. Sophia, her head snapped up. Lena stood at the edge of the clearing, wide-eyed, clutching 2 coffees in her hands. "Oh no," Sophia muttered. Lucian stiffened beside her. Sophia rushed toward Lena, intercepting her before she could step any further. "What are you doing here?" Sophia hissed under her breath. Lena blinked. "I brought coffee. I figured you'd be at the bookstore, but then I saw Darius at the gas station, and he said—" Sophia cut her off. "Right. Darius. Of course he did." Lena peeked over Sophia's shoulder, eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Why does this look like some sort of secret forest fight club?" "It's not." "It definitely looks like one." Sophia forced a laugh, nudging Lena back toward the trail. "It's just a weird outdoor gym thing. Let's go." Lena frowned, but relented, following Sophia back toward the edge of the clearing. "I don't know what you're hiding, but I will find out," Lena muttered, handing Sophia her coffee. Sophia sighed. "I'm sure you will." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Lucian stood on the porch of the compound, gazing out over the woods. Darius joined him, leaning on the railing. "She's tougher than you give her credit for," Darius said, nodding toward where Sophia had disappeared down the trail. Lucian's expression darkened slightly. "I know." Darius glanced at him, sensing something else. "You're worried." Lucian's eyes didn't leave the tree line. "Ceres is more than just some human, Darius. I can feel it." Darius's smirk faded. "You think Marcus knows that?" Lucian's grip tightened on the railing. "I'm sure of it." Chapter 10. The forest felt heavier than usual. Sophia tugged her jacket tighter around her body, the cold biting a little sharper as dusk crept over the horizon. The compound's lanterns flickered faintly in the distance, but she'd taken the long way back, needing a moment to herself. The pack's training had been exhausting, both physically and mentally. Darius had been surprisingly gracious after she'd outmaneuvered him, but the others still watched her with guarded eyes. Lucian hadn't said much, but she caught him staring more than once, his silver gaze lingering like he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. "Why do I feel like some kind of experiment?" Sophia exhaled, pushing the thought away as she focused on the path ahead. The woods were quiet, save for the crunch of her footsteps over dried leaves. Still, something tugged at the back of her mind, a sensation she couldn't shake. She wasn't alone. The hairs on her neck prickled, and her fingers twitched by her side. Sophia glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. But the feeling remained. "Okay, relax," she whispered, as if that would somehow make it less creepy. "It's just paranoia." Another step. A branch cracked behind her. Sophia froze. The sound wasn't distant, it was close, too close. Before she could turn, something moved in the trees. A flash of yellow eyes, her breath caught. The first wolf slinked forward, its black fur rippling in the dim light. The second followed, larger, snarling softly as they flanked her on either side of the path. Sophia stumbled back a step, heart hammering in her chest. "Gods," she murmured, palms raising instinctively. "Nice wolves. Let's just. The larger one growled, lips curling back to reveal sharp, glinting teeth. Sophia didn't wait. She ran. Her feet pounded against the earth, lungs burning as she sprinted toward the compound lights. The wolves were faster. She could hear them, the rustle of underbrush and snapping twigs closing in. A blur of fur shot past her. Sophia yelped as the smaller wolf cut her off, teeth bared. She skidded to a stop, gasping. Crapped. The second wolf circled behind her, the low rumble of its growl reverberating through the trees. Sophia's eyes darted between them. Think. Then the larger wolf lunged. A flash of black intercepted it midair, colliding with the rogue and sending it crashing to the ground. Sophia stumbled back, heart pounding as Lucian, in wolf form, stood between her and the second attacker. His black fur bristled, lips drawn back in a vicious snarl. His silver eyes glowed under the fading light, feral and razor-sharp. The rogue scrambled up, shaking itself off, but Lucian wasted no time. He struck, tearing into the wolf with terrifying precision. The fight was brutal. No hesitation, no mercy. Sophia couldn't look away. Lucian was faster, stronger. His teeth sank into the rogue's shoulder, forcing it down. The second wolf hesitated, but Lucian's growl sent it skittering back into the woods, disappearing back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. Sophia pressed a hand to her chest, the pounding in her ribs deafening. Lucian stood over the injured rogue, silver eyes blazing as his claws dug into the ground beside it. For a moment, Sophia thought he might kill it. "Lucian," she breathed, barely able to find her voice. The black wolf stilled. Slowly, Lucian's gaze lifted to meet hers. Recognition flickered, and Sophia watched as his form shimmered beneath the fading light. Fur melted into skin, and within seconds, Lucian stood before her in human form, chest rising and falling as if he'd barely broken a sweat. His eyes, however, remained sharp, dangerous. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low. Sophia shook her head, her pulse still racing. No, I'm fine." Lucian's eyes drifted to the rogue wolf limping away, his muscles tense. "Lucian," she repeated, stepping forward. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the trees. "I have to admit, watching you tear apart my wolves is starting to get old." Sophia turned sharply. A man stepped out from the shadows, his hands casually tucked into his coat pockets. His dark hair brushed his shoulders, and his eyes, amber and cold, settled on Lucian with faint amusement. Lucian's stance shifted immediately, shoulders stiffening as he stepped between Sophia and the stranger. "Marcus," Lucian growled. Marcus's gaze flicked to Sophia, curiosity sparking behind his smirk. "Well, this is interesting," Marcus said smoothly. "I was wondering who'd caught your attention." Lucian's voice darkened. "Leave her out of this." Marcus took a step forward, deliberately slow. "Relax, Lucian. I'm just intrigued. She smells different." His eyes locked on Sophia, unblinking. "Powerful. You've noticed it too, haven't you?" Sophia's stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. Lucian's hands clenched into fists. "Stay away from her." Marcus tilted his head almost lazily. "You can't keep her hidden forever. Sooner or later they'll come for her. And I won't always be the one leading them." Sophia's throat tightened. Marcus met her gaze one last time, his smile lingering. "See you around, Sophia." Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, Marcus slipped back into the woods, vanishing among the shadows. Silence settled like a weight between them. Lucian exhaled slowly, but Sophia could see the tension coiled in his frame. His hand suddenly wrapped gently around her wrist, pulling her closer. "You need to stay close to me," Lucian said, his silver eyes darkening as they lingered on the spot Marcus had disappeared. "This isn't over." Sophia nodded, but her mind raced. She wasn't sure what scared her more, Marcus's words or the quiet fury simmering just beneath Lucian's calm exterior. Chapter 11. The walk back to the compound was silent. Sophia's heart hadn't quite returned to normal since Marcus's cryptic parting words. Her palms still felt clammy, and her mind raced, replaying the way his amber eyes had lingered on her, like he knew something she didn't. Lucian stayed close, his arm brushing against hers every so often, as if making sure she didn't disappear. His usually calm demeanor felt stretched thin, shoulders tense and jaw locked. "You can let go of me now," Sophia said softly, trying to lighten the mood. Lucian blinked, his silver eyes shifting to her before realizing his hand was still loosely wrapped around her wrist. He released her, but his gaze didn't soften. "You shouldn't have been out there alone," he said. "I wasn't. I was near the compound. That's not the same thing." Sophia sighed, tucking her arms around herself. "I didn't exactly have rogue wolf attack on my evening bingo card, Lucian." His lips twitched slightly, but the amusement didn't stick. The compound finally came into view, its lanterns glowing softly beneath the dark canopy of trees. Darius was waiting at the entrance, leaning casually against one of the porch beams with his arms crossed. "Tell me you didn't scare her off already," Darius teased, but the flicker of concern in his eyes betrayed the casual tone. Lucian ignored him, ushering Sophia inside. The warmth of the common room wrapped around her, but the lingering tension in the air made it hard to breathe. "What happened?" Darius's gaze narrowed as he followed them in. "Marcus," Lucian said flatly. Darius's easy smirk faded. Sophia sank into one of the worn leather chairs by the fire, her legs finally giving out beneath her. "I'm guessing that's not a good thing." Lucian's eyes darkened. "It's not." Darius stepped closer, resting his hands on the back of the chair opposite Sophia. "Marcus has been rallying rogue wolves for months now. He's trying to challenge Lucian's leadership." "Why?" Sophia asked, her throat dry. Lucian didn't answer right away. Darius, however, arched a brow. Power, control, typical villain starter pack. Lucian shot him a look, but Sophia wasn't in the mood for vague answers. Yeah, well, that starter pack was staring at me like I'm some missing puzzle piece. What was that about? Lucian's eyes flicked toward Darius briefly before settling back on her. Marcus believes you're different. Sophia laughed, though it came out a little hollow. Different how? I'm very human last I checked. Darius shifted, exchanging another glance with Lucian. You could be carrying dormant abilities, Darius said carefully. Humans with latent supernatural traits aren't unheard of. Sophia's stomach twisted. I think I'd know if I had superpowers, thanks. Darius shrugged. Not necessarily. Sometimes it doesn't show until what? Until something triggers it, Lucian finished quietly. Sophia ran a hand through her hair, tugging lightly at the ends. Well, that's just great. I'm walking around like some mystery piñata, waiting to see what falls out. Darius snorted. Pretty much. Lucian frowned. It's more complicated than that. Sophia slumped back into the chair. Of course it is. The crackling fire was the only sound between them for a long moment. The weight of the supernatural world pressed against Sophia's shoulders, heavier than it had ever felt before. So, she said finally, glancing at Lucian. What now? What's stopping Marcus from just showing up at my front door? He'll won't. Lucian's tone was firm, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. Darius smirked faintly. He'll try. Lucian shot his brother a glare but didn't argue. Sophia rubbed her temples. You guys are really bad at this comforting thing. I'm reinforcing patrols around your apartment, Lucian said, ignoring her comment. You won't be alone. Sophia's gaze snapped to his. Wait, you're sending wolves to watch my apartment? Lucian's silver eyes softened slightly. It's for your safety. Sophia's pulse quickened, not entirely sure if it was from the idea of wolves lurking around her place, or the way Lucian's voice dropped when he said your safety. She shifted in the chair, crossing her legs. Look, I appreciate the whole bodyguard situation, but this feels excessive. It's necessary. Darius arched a brow at Lucian. That's not wrong, you know. Might be a little overprotective, even for you. Lucian's gaze hardened. I'm not risking it. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly. It? Or me? Lucian hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. That's what I thought. She stood, brushing invisible dust from her jeans. I can take care of myself. Lucian stepped forward, lowering his voice. Not against Marcus. Sophia held his gaze, stubborn but unsure. Lucian's fingers brushed against hers lightly, barely noticeable, but enough to send a flicker of warmth up her arm. I'll make sure you're safe, he said, almost too softly. Sophia swallowed hard, hating how much she wanted to trust him. Later that night, Sophia sat curled up on her couch, flicking through channels on the TV, but nothing held her attention. Her apartment felt smaller than usual. Too quiet. She tried to convince herself she wasn't waiting for something, some sign of danger. As she set her mug down on the coffee table, a faint shift in the shadows outside the window caught her eye. Sophia stood slowly, peeling back the curtain just an inch. Two silver eyes blinked back at her from the tree line. Lucian. Her breath caught. She let the curtain fall, but for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted him to leave. Chapter 12. Sophia sat on the edge of the worn leather couch, arms crossed, watching Lucian pace the length of the room like a caged predator. This isn't up for debate, Lucian said, his tone clipped. "You're staying at the compound." Sophia's fingers dug into her palms. "I have an apartment, a life. You can't just... You think Marcus cares about your life, Sophia." Lucian's silver eyes flashed as he stopped, facing her. "He's not going to knock politely on your door. He's going to keep coming until he gets what he wants." Sophia shot to her feet, matching his intensity. "And what exactly is that, Lucian? I'm not some mystical artifact. I'm just..." "You're not just anything," he growled, stepping closer. His presence, solid and unwavering, filled the space between them. "Marcus sees something in you, and until we figure out why, you're not safe." Sophia opened her mouth to argue, but the weight in his gaze silenced her. He wasn't just being overprotective. He was scared. For her, she swallowed hard. "I can't just give up everything because you say so." Lucian's jaw tightened, and for a long moment they stood locked in a silent standoff. Finally he exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking you to stay alive." The rawness in his voice caught her off guard, and something in her chest twisted painfully. But the idea of hiding out in the compound like some damsel didn't sit right. Before she could respond, the front door creaked open. Lena stepped inside, holding 2 takeaway cups, her eyes bouncing between them. "Am I interrupting a staring contest, or is this just your weird version of foreplay?" Sophia groaned, dropping onto the couch with a thud. "Lena..." Lena plopped down next to her, handing her one of the cups. "I bring caffeine and moral support. What's going on?" Sophia shot Lucian a pointed look. "Mr. Lone Wolf over there thinks I should permanently relocate to his forest bunker." Lena blinked, processing, then slowly turned to Lucian. "Okay, first, you could have led with that." Lucian sighed, leaning against the wall with crossed arms. "And second," Lena continued, "he's probably right." Sophia whipped around. "Excuse me?" Lena shrugged, sipping her drink. "Look, I'm all for independence, but you said it yourself. Things are getting weird. Wolves, creepy guy lurking in the trees, and honestly, I don't trust your survival instincts." Sophia threw her free hand in the air. "I've survived just fine until now." Lena arched a brow. "Yeah, by sheer luck." She nudged Sophia's knee with her foot. "I'm just saying, maybe let the werewolves handle this one." Lucian smirked faintly. "She's the smart one." Lena raised her cup in mock cheers. Sophia groaned, dragging her hands down her face. "Fine," she muttered. "But I'm not moving in." "I'll stay for a few days. Max." Lucian's gaze softened, but he didn't push further. "Good," he said quietly. "That's all I'm asking." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "I'm still bringing my own snacks." Later that evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Lucian placed a small silver pendant in Sophia's hand. It was cool against her skin, shaped like a crescent moon. "What is this?" she asked, turning it over curiously. Lucian's eyes followed the pendant. "It marks you as under my protection. If other shifters approach, they'll know you're not to be touched." Sophia frowned. "And if Marcus shows up?" Lucian's expression darkened. "It won't stop Marcus, but it'll make him think twice." She traced the edge of the pendant with her thumb. The weight of it seemed heavier than it should have been, like she was holding more than just silver. Lucian's gaze met hers, softer than before. "You don't have to wear it, but I'd prefer if you did." Sophia hesitated for a beat, then slipped the chain over her head. The pendant settled against her collarbone, cool against her skin. For reasons she didn't fully understand, it made her feel safer. "Thanks," she said quietly. Lucian nodded, but didn't look away. As she caught the intensity of his stare, a realization settled over her. This wasn't just about protection. Wearing that pendant meant stepping deeper into Lucian's world, accepting the weight of his pack and everything that came with it. It was one thing to stay temporarily. It was another to belong. Sophia wasn't sure which scared her more. Later that night, as she lay in one of the guest rooms, the forest stretched out beyond the window, dark and quiet. But as she drifted off, the faint sensation of being watched crept over her. Sophia's eyes cracked open. At the edge of the woods, barely visible through the trees, silver eyes shimmered in the moonlight. Lucian. Sophia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Part of her wanted to pull the curtains closed, but she didn't.